All right, let's talk about something we all feel, something so fundamental to being human, our sense of morality. Why is it that some things feel not just like a bad idea, but deeply, objectively wrong?
Yeah, some things just feel wrong. It's this gut-level certainty, isn't it? A universal human feeling that goes way beyond simple preference or what culture tells you.
And I don't just mean inconvenient, like, hitting every red light on your way to work. Or even just awkward.
No, we mean wrong. That deep conviction that a real line has been crossed, that some fundamental rule about how the world is supposed to be has been smashed.
And that right there is the heart of it. There's a world of difference between saying, I don't like this, and saying, this should not be happening. So where on earth does that powerful sense of should actually come from?
To figure that out, we first have to draw a really sharp line in the sand between what's just a personal preference and what we treat as a moral fact.
Just think about the difference. A preference like, I don't like chocolate. Well, that's just a statement about me and my taste buds. It makes no demand on you at all. But declaring genocide is wrong, whoa, that feels completely different, doesn't it? That's not about my personal feelings. It feels like a claim about reality itself.
Now, one view is that our moral sense is just a handy survival tool that evolved over time. And if that's the case, then that statement about genocide is, deep down, no different than the one about chocolate. It's just a useful feeling, a product of our brain chemistry, nothing more than neurons firing in a specific way.
But let's be real, almost nobody actually lives like that's true. When someone genuinely wrongs you, betrays you, steals from you, you don't just sit there and think, my brain chemistry is currently displeased. No way. You think, that was wrong, and you mean it like it's a fact, not just your opinion.
And this leads us straight into a huge problem for a purely materialist worldview. We can call it the naturalist's dilemma. How do you get real, solid, right and wrong from a universe that has no ultimate purpose or meaning?
I mean, if the universe is just atoms bumping around in the dark, just matter and motion governed by blind physical laws, then concepts like good and evil, well, they don't really have a place to land, do they? A virus that kills millions has no moral duties. A supernova that vaporizes a planet isn't evil. They just are.
What's really fascinating is that this same kind of thinking applies to science itself. The physicist Paul Davies points out that for science to even work, scientists have to accept, as an act of faith really, that the universe is governed by rational, predictable laws. He calls this an essentially theological worldview. It makes you wonder, why should we expect a rational physical order, but not a rational moral order?
So this all forces us to ask a really stark question. When we look back at history and we say that slavery was objectively wrong, not just unpopular today, but truly wrong, are we stating a fact about reality, or are we just expressing the popular feeling of our culture? Because if it's only a feeling, it carries no more real weight than the opposite feelings of those who supported it.
But that doesn't feel right to most of us, does it? We feel deeply that it was a fact, and that powerful intuition leads us to a totally different explanation for our moral experience. The idea of a law that exists above and beyond all of us.
The writer C.S. Lewis made a brilliant point about this. The very act of arguing about what's fair or unfair tells you something huge. You don't argue with someone unless you both, deep down, believe there's some real standard of fairness that you can appeal to. Otherwise, you're just shouting opinions at each other.
And Lewis took this even further. He argued that this rational and moral element we find inside ourselves, this inner voice that insists on a standard of right and wrong, feels like an intruder in a purely material world. He saw it as a clue, evidence of a supernatural reality breaking into our natural one.
So this gives us this powerful concept of a moral law. It's not something we humans just invent, like the rules of a game. It's something we discover, like the laws of mathematics. It's a standard that exists independently of us, and it points to a source beyond ourselves.
Okay, let's bring this down from the philosophical clouds to something deeply personal. This moral law isn't just an abstract idea. It makes itself known in our own lives, and one of the clearest ways it does that is through the experience of guilt.
Just take a second and think of a time when you did something that you knew in your gut was wrong. Not a time you got caught and felt embarrassed. I mean a time when nobody else knew a thing, but you felt the weight of it. You just knew.
In that moment, that feeling wasn't just a social inconvenience or some psychological hiccup. It felt like a verdict from a court you couldn't see. From this perspective, guilt isn't a bug in our programming. It's a feature. It's a signal pointing to the reality that we violated a real objective standard.
So let's pull all these threads together. When you step back, you start to see that a cumulative case is building up from several deep realities about our world that all seem to point beyond it.
First, you have our own conscious minds and the power of reason. Second, there's the deep mathematical order and understandability of the universe. And third, what we've been talking about today, our innate, inescapable sense of objective right and wrong.
These are three massive realities of our existence. And the crucial point is that none of them sit very comfortably in a purely random materialist worldview. They look less like cosmic accidents and more like signposts, all pointing in the exact same direction.
And where are they pointing? Not to some abstract principle or a cold, impersonal force. If our moral intuitions are true, if there really is a moral law, then following that law to its source doesn't end in an it ends in a someone, a personal lawgiver who is the very definition of goodness.
So in the end, the evidence from our own reason, from the order in the cosmos, and from the law written on our hearts all suggests something profound, that faith and reason are not enemies, but two paths converging on the exact same truth. Thanks for exploring it with me.